Now, technically, Tom, since you're in a residential setting, it would not be hazardous. You would be exempt.
Oh, that's right. Because the laws of physics cease to exist in residential homes.
That's true.
That's true. I love it. That is a very good point. All right. So now, Larry Ayer is you are the correlating committee. You are the acting correlating committee chair. We just saw. I think it was Mike Johnston, who was the correlating committee chair for. What is how many years does that is that position held for? Is that 9 years?
That's 9 years or 3 cycles of the NEC. So I just completed my first year, and I've learned a lot.
You've learned a lot.
I've learned a lot.
Man, well, you're launching the 2023 code cycle, so I know you've set up a bunch of stuffs, and you have some slides for us. You and Donny want to talk about. Do you want to start talking through your presentation materials?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that.
Yep, let's do that.
And so just introduce myself. I'm Larry Ayer, and I am from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm an electrical contractor. Been doing it for probably 30 plus years. And I was given the opportunity back in August of 2019 to chair the NEC Correlating Committee. And I'm very honored to be able to do that. I've probably been working on the NFPA stuff since 2005. Started out with Code Making Panel 3, and then I moved to Code Making Panel 13 with, I am on that panel with Steve Fromey. And also I am a member of the NFPA 70E committee, so I really enjoy that. So, but it's been a challenge here in the last year, trying to, determine a direction and where we want to head for the NEC. Also, and to let everybody know that the Correlating Committee also oversees a total of 9 NFPA documents. Those documents might include 70B, which is the recommended practice for maintenance. And we have the NFPA 70E, which is the safety standard, and several other documents that are under our purview. But the one that gets the most attention is the National Electric Code. So again, I appreciate Tom allowing me the opportunity to talk about where I think we would like to head in the future and over the next 9 years, where we want to take things. So Tom, if you want to put up those slides, I did about just short 9 slides here to kind of talk about where we want to go. And I've presented this before, and I think some of this is really, hopefully everybody that's listening in will find this somewhat fascinating. So the first slide there, we talk about, it's kind of interesting, you think about the way things are changing in this world. And I've always mentioned this before, that if you think about 1970, the average length of the time a company would be on the S&P 500 stock exchange was 40 years. And since the 1970 era, a standard length of time in today's world that a company remains on the S&P 500 is only about 12 years. So things have accelerated greatly over that last 40, 50 years. And so if you look at the one on the right, the other thing that's happened recently, and this is being rolled out by NFPA, and I think actually it was rolled out today. Today was the first day of NFPA Link. And this is going to be a new way that NFPA is going to deliver codes to the user. And Donny is and can also speak to this, but this is a really unique thing that they're going to try to do. You can still purchase the NEC code book, but they're trying to move away from the PDF and to come to a more interactive type of environment for the user. So you'll be able to get a subscription to NFPA Link, and you'll be able to search for codes. You'll be able to maybe type in fire pumps. And when you type in fire pumps, it should be able to filter out and look for anything that takes to design or install a fire pump. So it'll come up with NFPA 70 requirements, maybe in Article 695, but it will also come up with requirements in NFPA 20. So you're not just getting the NEC, and this is going to evolve over the next several years. But I think this is, moving NFPA into the digital world. And I think this is going to be really something that it'll help people be more collaborative. So sometimes in my world where all the electricians get code books and you pass them out, this is something that might be able to be more collaborative, iPad based. People can share things. And so I don't know, Donnie, did you want to mention anything about the direct link?
No, nothing other than you're right. It's just starting. And when you think about how many installations we see where there's additional information in another NFPA standard that would be useful, I think this will be a really good tool for people to understand holistically about the installation, rather than just trying to figure out the text in one spot. I think it's got a lot of value.
Yeah, and one of the things that, if you look at the way society's moving, things are becoming more technical in nature. Sometimes it's hard to find things in the NEC, and I think this will be a more easier approach for the user. And I'm sure things will, like anything when it first starts out, they will massage it and make sure that it works and add to it. And over time, I think people will really like it. So, so look for that. Again, that started today on the 21st. So if you want to go to the next thing there, and going back to the last slide, we don't have to go back, but you look at 1972, everybody remembers that's older, Sears and Roebuck, and and now Amazon has taken over. So we need to evolve, not only in business world, but also in codes and standards. And so we want to try to do that over the next 9 years. So Tom, if you want to go to the next one. And part of that evolution is kind of the slide that you see on the screen. You think about it, we've always had low voltage systems. When people think of low voltage systems, they think of 48 volt DC, 48 volt AC, and we're drastically and quickly changing. So in today's world, probably last cycle or the cycle before, you heard of terms of power over Ethernet, things that are powered from network switches, cameras that are powered, wireless access points that are powered. And now we have a new thing called digital electricity, where you will bring in AC to a transmitter, and that transmitter will pulse digital electricity at 360 volts to a receiver. And if for some reason that the wire was cut between the transmitter and receiver, power stops. And so this is kind of revolutionary, and this is considered a much safer way to deliver electricity. This is already being implemented in wireless access points. You can deliver this 2,000 meters. I think this is being employed in stadiums, sports arenas, things like that, where they need to get long distances and power things up. And there's talk that somewhere down the road that they will put in these receivers inside refrigerators and things of that nature, and try to use computer cables to power up equipment. So things are changing fast, and we need to, as the NEC goes, we need to try to make sure that how are we going to make sure that the NEC remains relevant in the future? How do we make sure that it's easy for the user of the code to find information? And how do we make sure that inspectors can find the information and use it and help them in their day-to-day task?
Larry, we've got an installation close to me. It's not in our jurisdiction, but in a neighboring jurisdiction where they're using it in the hospitals. Actually, in a VA hospital, they've already got it installed.
And presently, right now, it's not even in the NEC.
Yeah.
So the NEC, we put together a task group to study this issue, say, hey, where can we put it, and how can we make it so it's clear, and move this forward and move this technology into the future. So Tom, do you want to go to the next one? So what we did here for the National Electrical Code Correlating Committee, we kind of looked at some things that are long-range goals. And so, from every year or every cycle, we put together task groups of people that will study issues that are relevant to the electrical industry, things that we need to look at. Do we need to look at digital electricity? How do we put that into the code? What about POE? Are the requirements in there? And so, what about incident energy? Like we talked about 240.87 and 240.67. How do we get those things in the code? But there's also things that we come up with that we need to look long range. And so my goal and my thought process is to put things in place that we can look down the road 2 to 3 cycles, 10 to 15 years, and say, what will the NEC look like? And what should we be trying to do to make it a better product? Always making sure that it's relevant, given how fast things change. And so if you look up here on one of the slides here, I put together 4 task groups. The medium voltage task group is kind of interesting over time. We'll get over that. Medium voltage is kind of hard to find, but I put Robert Osborne as chair, and Robert has done a fantastic job. And in a couple slides, you'll see what Robert and his group are doing for this cycle. And then my goal is to have this group together for the next 2 to 3 cycles so they can make significant progress in making it easier for medium voltage. The next one I put together is renewable energy. Renewable energy is a tremendous part of the electrical industry. It is growing leaps and bounds. Microgrids, distributed generation, all of these things. And what happens is we have things up in chapter 6 and 7 that sometimes maybe we have 2 panels that cover these topics, CMP 4 and 13. And so we want to get them to communicate and make this over time better. Limited energy, chapter 7 and 8. A lot of these things that we're discussing here in the back of the book, I put Todd Lotman. He's also from Eaton. He's a chair so of this task group. And we're going to look improving the way we do limited energy or low voltage so it's more usable. And the last one we put into place is the NEC structure, and we'll talk about that. But Donny Cook, who's on this presentation, he will be chairing that along with Robert Osborne. So we have a tremendous amount of people that do such a great job to move the electrical industry forward. And these gentlemen are doing a fantastic job. And we look for there to be significant changes in the future and improving the NEC long term. So Tom, if you want to go to the next one here, I think the next one is we're going to start talking about medium voltage. And, when you think about medium voltage, I think when the NEC was first started, medium voltage was basically, considered the utility. And there really wasn't much thought put into the long-term application of medium voltage. It was, done years ago, and over time, these requirements have gotten placed into the NEC. But in today's world, medium voltage is become a great part of renewable energy. I've heard things from the inspectors like, how do I inspect medium voltage? Where do I find the requirements? Sometimes the requirements are in parts of an article. Sometimes they're at the end of the article. Sometimes they don't even exist. And so sometimes they're in Article 490. It says medium voltage equipment. And sometimes they might be buried in 430 under motors. So when we first started this, we put Robert Osborne in here. And this has been, he's done a great job. They've put together numerous meetings on this, and this is what they've come up with for right now. Now, believe it or not, most of the people on this group are very passionate about this, and they would like to move really quickly on this and like to see a separate chapter created for medium voltage. So everything that is regarding medium voltage will be in one location. But the group got together, and this is what they first came up with to start. And if you look on the screen here, anything that ends in 5 will kind of be a medium voltage article. And so they have it as articles 110 would get split up into 110 and 115, where 110 would cover requirements below 1,000 volts. And if you look at this here, we kind of changed the nomenclature. And that instead of just saying over or under 1,000 volts, we said over 1,000 volts AC, 1,500 volts DC. And so, the way the the industry's moving. There's more and more products dedicated to DC. And so we want to make sure that when we do things moving forward, that we look at not only AC, but we look at DC also. And so sometimes I think when we put those terms in there, people will understand the code covers both applications. We're going to also, they also created, went into chapter 2, and they broke those up into other parts. And so they took Article 200, which was use and identification of the grounded conductor, and they made that also 205 for identification of grounded conductors over 1,000 volts AC and 1,500 volts DC. If you look at branch circuits, feeders, and service conductors for medium voltage, there's very little content in Article 210 for branch circuits. I think there's one section.
There's one in 215 for feeders, Larry, or one or two, and I don't think there was any in 210. We mirrored some for the 235.
Yeah, very little content.
Yeah.
And so, in 235, there's more. And so, so each one, it kind of slowly grows on itself, but we wanted to make it easier for the user of the code. So we broke everything out and called it now a new article said 235. And that will cover branch circuits, feeders, and service conductors over 1,000 volts AC, 1,500 volts DC. We took overcurrent protection. Overcurrent protection's in 240, but one of the things that Robert Osborne's group did, you will find overcurrent protection stuff within Article 490. So what he did was he took the requirements for overcurrent protection in 490, merged them with the medium voltage requirements in 240, and now created a new Article 245 that will cover all of those topics in one section. And then we took 250 and we split that up and removed the medium voltage grounding requirements out into 255. And what's interesting about that is when you look at some of those things, 250 talks over for medium voltage that you would ground it using table 250.122. And when you talk to medium voltage guys, they're like, well, that's not really how we do things. And so we're trying to put more emphasis on medium voltage and by breaking these sections out. The other thing we're going to do in chapter 3, we're breaking out 300 to have 300 and 305 to move those medium voltage requirements. And we would take 311, which is the medium voltage conductors and cables, and make that 315. And then last thing we did in chapter 4, we would make Article 490, 495. So this is being submitted. This has been submitted during the first draft stage. Robert, I think, submitted 9 public inputs, a significant amount of work. I think in some of these public inputs, he has over 60 pages of work that he did on this. This is not to mean that this is going to pass, but this is something that I think there's a need for, and it'll be interesting to see how the code panels deal with this during this cycle. Donny, you were worked on that medium voltage task group, and love to have your input on the medium voltage work and what you see as an electrical inspector.
So one of the things, Larry, that we found every meeting we held, we would, Robert continued to try to herd us towards structurally looking at these things and trying to identify where the requirements are at now, and then just to try to put them in a place where they would be easier to find. But in every discussion, when we were trying to do that structurally, we would find gaps where the requirements either didn't exist or where they needed improvement. And when they were buried in other places in different ways, depending on which article or which chapter you were in, it was so difficult to find it. You didn't realize how much of a gap was there. But this really made it obvious when you collect them together and you look and you say, well, where is this other piece? And you realize the piece is not there. It's just missing. So I think this will be helpful to everybody that has to use medium voltage in their daily work, it'll help them to realize that if we have gaps and maybe people can start submitting inputs to correct those items. From an inspection standpoint, it's the same as it is from a contracting standpoint. You're out there in the field trying to find the requirements, and some of them are there, and like you say, in a complete part. Some of them are one section. Some of them just don't exist. So those installations are not getting fewer. There's more of them. There's clearly more of them today than there was when I started inspecting over 30 years ago. But we've always had medium voltage installations, but there's not less today than there was in 1988. There's clearly more now than there was then. We've got them on campuses, we've got them at hospitals, universities, business campuses. We've got some big companies that come in and instead of having one building, they've got a campus of buildings, and so they buy medium voltage power and distribute it around on their campus. We've got a lot of industrials with medium voltage. So I think it's one of those things where we've identified a gap, and this is one of the ways that this committee, this task group, thought it might be easier to identify those gaps and improve them. And we'll just have to see what the public thinks.
And what's interesting is listening in on the task group, when people say, okay, how do you do medium voltage? Some people say, well, I use the NESC, the National Electrical Safety Code. Some people say, well, I don't use anything. I don't even use the NEC. And so I think that we discovered that we want to make sure we're relevant. We want to make sure that the NEC covers this. And we think that by covering this, we can do several things. One, we might be able to get a separate code making panel to deal with these. A lot of times the code making panels do not have medium voltage expertise. And so one of the thoughts is by separating these out, we could have more special experts review these and add content over time. We think that this will just help inspectors. We think this also will help maybe people that are research and testing. They will be able to maybe get more products that are certified and listed. And so we think this will help out in a whole numerous set of areas for the NEC.
Larry, we got a comment in from Ryan Jackson. He said he'd love to see the medium voltage changes come to fruition. And he pointed out the fact that there are some conflicts right now, even like in 24088, where it applies to above and below 1 kV. And so there are some areas where once we start getting into these different sections for medium voltage, we're going to find some of those conflicts that exist in the book that no one's really looked at before in detail. So this effort is, I think, going to go a long way to ferreting out some issues that are out there and cleaning things up in the process.
Yeah, and I think Ryan makes a good point, because I think, and I can't remember if I'm correct or not, but I think 240.87 might cover, I think it covers low and medium voltage power circuit breakers, and then 240.88 might cover medium voltage circuit breakers. So I think there's some conflicts there. And I think that, this will really help out correct some of those. One of the things the task group discovered was, ENT, Smurf tube. I mean, when you look at that, you would never think that that is rated for over 1,000 volts, and yet it is. And part of the reason is that people have kind of tended to ignore the topic over time. But we think this approach will put a spotlight on this whole area that we've been missing for years.
Yeah, and I think what he was referring to too in 24088, for circuit breakers, it says low and medium voltage power circuit breakers. When 24088 is in the does not apply to medium voltage. So there's some direct language that needs to get cleaned up, and then this effort's going to really go a long way. And
I think the actual task group addressed that exact comment. They addressed that in their public input.
Sweet.
Larry, one of the things that in the discussion that came up the first several meetings we had was trying to figure out where does medium voltage start and stop. And so it'll be interesting to hear from the public if, I mean, we picked, the over 1,000 volt AC and the 1,500 volt DC, but there was a lot of discussion to come up with that number. And clearly it'll be interesting to see what the public thinks, if they believe those are the right numbers. I think there was some good reasons we landed on those numbers, but it'll be very interesting to hear people that work with with these systems all the time. They may look at it and say, boy, you made a mistake. It should have been something else. So that's really what this whole process is about, is to put something down and on a piece of paper and send it in, and give everybody a chance to weigh in.
Absolutely, Donnie. So let's go to the next topic here. The next topic is renewable energy. And, we put this together, and I really appreciate Tom Dimitrovich. He has done a fantastic job kind of herding cats on this group. This group is made up of numerous people over various code making panels. Typically, code making panel 13 and code making panel 4 deal with these topics. And what happens is this is a very, very technical area of the industry. And, we're dealing with fuel cells and small and large photovoltaic systems. We deal with energy storage, deal with generators and batteries, all different types of sources of power. And partially what happens is, and this is I've come to this conclusion, that it's difficult when these code making panels get these topics and try to renew the code every 3 years and revise it. Sometimes, these code panels just basically get together for 2 weeks out of 3 years to put together technical requirements in the NEC. And so this goal here is to get more people talking, not only just the 2 weeks, but to get them to talk over the entire 3-year process. And I think by doing that, what we will do is we will actually make tremendous headway in getting a more usable renewable energy section. And so, we've got people like Bill Brooks and Jason Fisher on code making panel 4. We've had Greg Ball and Chad Kennedy and Tim Windy from CMP 13. So we've got some research and testing people here. We got some grounding people in here. So this is a cross section of people. I've heard a lot of good feedback from people on this committee. They like the discussions. And what's funny about this is a lot of times in code making panel 4, they typically have 400 to 500 public inputs. For this cycle, they only had 249. And I think part of the issue is that by having this dialogue between these groups, I think it actually probably helps reduce some of the public inputs, because they work together as a group to come up with some common language that can improve these sections. So, Tom, did you want to kind of weigh in on what you're doing for this long-range task group and what you've seen evolve over the last several months?
Yeah, I can do that. Let me just put my picture up there. So, and I'm not Donny Cook. I'm Tom Dimitrovich, by the way. But I'm going to leave that there. But we had, you know what, Larry? What I learned in this effort, I don't know how many meetings we had, but we had a lot of meetings. And as you could tell by the mix, we had panel 13 people, panel 5, 4. We had a good mix, a healthy mix of code making panel members outside of panel 4. And what we learned was there was our first, I don't know how many, handful of meetings was a process of learning, because there are terms that are used. There are, there's the challenge with Article 705 and 710 and 712 and then 702 with optional standby systems. What's a standalone system? How does that differ from optional standby systems? And how do they all relate? And there were questions around grounding and bonding. I know we had with Scott Harding, panel 5, and and Christine Porter, there were a lot of questions just on some of the terminology used around grounding and bonding. So what I think the entire team saw in our effort to come to changes and trying to figure out the direction for the whole renewable energy world of code making panel, or the panels or articles, was that we've got a lot of work to do to get things aligned with chapters 1 through 4 and other areas of the code. So we tried to address some of the things with regard to how we consider ampacity of a conductor, which and then what a feeder is. I mean, there's some basic fundamental building blocks on what is a feeder, and are feeders located in alternative energy systems, and then how, and if that is the case, they like to call all of those conductors power source output circuit conductors instead of feeders, and so we're trying to meddle through the terminology and help people understand ampacity is ampacity, right? The difference that we have in 690 between what we do in say 215, Article 215 for feeders, and conducting in calculating ampacity of a conductor is around load currents versus source currents, right? So the alternative energy guys who have batteries and are they dealing with photovoltaics and wind and all that, they'll say we don't have load currents, we have source currents, and we size conductors to source currents, not to load currents. So we worked through a lot of that, and I think the changes that we came up with, we made a mess of public inputs just around clarity of that, and then we also tried to address the fact that we've got these alternative energy sources, which could be wind. What's wind? Wind is a generator that's turned by wind instead of by propane or natural gas or diesel fuel. Right, so it's a generator. So what's that different? How's that different from 445? And how do those requirements overlap with each other? And are they consistent with each other? So we talked about restructuring, and we put a public input in to say, let's move all these together in series. Let's take that 705, combine it with 710 and 712, get rid of 710 and 712, make one sort of overview of an article, and then align all of those other alternative energy sources in series. So we created I think it was a 689, which is the combined 705, 712, and 710, and then we left 690 where it's at with PV, but we moved. We're suggesting to move 445 up into that family. We're suggesting to bring the batteries up into that family and say, look, if it's not a service, if it's not coming from a utility, it's really one of these other on-site power generation type of applications, which are all related to each other. So we moved a lot of that together. We'll see what the public says about it, but we did a lot of work, and this is a great team. There's a lot of knowledge on here. I know I learned a lot just managing the dialogue. So
Yeah, what was interesting listening to your dialogue, you'd have people from Code Making Panel 5 say, I'm kind of a novice at this, but what is functional grounded? I don't get it. And so that dialogue, I think, sometimes we have these little, kingdoms in the NEC. We have the renewable world, and then we have the grounding world. And I think that by getting people to communicate earlier, I think it will be more beneficial to the NEC long term.
Yeah, I agree with you. The dialogue that we generated, and I love Scott Harding, because Scott's famous. I love it because he'll go, I'm not the sharpest one on the phone here, but this doesn't make sense. And you're like, spot on, because a lot of times when you look at the terminology, you say, well, you call it one thing over here, but we call it something different in Article 250, or we call it something different. What is that conductor? It's protected at the source, and it lands on an overcurrent protected device. I mean, we know that's a feeder, but Panel 4 guys like to call that power source output circuit conductors and not feeders, and I know that must drive inspectors and others crazy. So we're going to try to add clarity and simplify things, but I think the reorganization is critical to that success.
Absolutely, and we will kind of cover some of those things here in a couple slides, talking about structure. If we go to the next slide, one of the last ones we did, which I think is one of the one of the most important ones I thought going into being the correlating committee chair. And over time, I've evolved that all three of these are so important to the future of the NEC. But this one I think is pretty important. And more installations are going into the low voltage area. We talked about digital electricity. We talked about PoE. We talked about low voltage. And what is happening over time is that everything up here is in chapter 7 and 8. And, if you think about the history of chapter 8 was always revolving around the utility company. That was kind of a standalone part of the NEC. That was set up so that if the Ma Bells of the world came in and wired your phone system in your house, that they did not really have to listen to any other part of the NEC, but they had their requirements up in 800. If you were doing coax, cable TV, you had your requirements, I think, up in 820 or 810. And so if you think about it, 840 is fiber to the home. And so a lot of these things were utility installed applications. But that was back in probably the 70s. We don't do those things anymore. Everything with deregulation and the way things are moving so fast, it's hard to tell who installs this equipment. And sometimes I think that when I go to IAI meetings, we quit. We discuss a lot of things in chapters 1 through 4, maybe 5 and 6. When we get to the back of the book in chapters 7 and 8, we're like, 8's the utility companies, we're going to ignore it. And I think that we need to do that better because I think the future of the code depends on it. I think that more and more installations have limited energy requirements, especially with these new technologies. And so we are, one of the things I show up here on the screen is this diagram is how does the inspector know when to start his inspection and when does he know where to end it? And so we've made great strides in here. And so one of the things that you'll see in this upcoming public input phase, this first draft, is we created something called a communication service point, quite similar to the electrical service point. And so we are hopeful that this term gets adopted into chapter 8. And this is the beginning of trying to make headway. It's going to take some time, but we want to, over the next 2 to 3 cycles, kind of come up with a solution to how we can work together. And again, this is panel 3 and panel 16. So this comes back to having a dialogue with these 2 panels to make sure that we can improve these sections. When we talk about the communication service point, we're trying to look at a way moving to the future of maybe having anything that deals with the line side or the utility side of the demarcation point. Maybe that should go in chapter 8. Maybe anything that's on the supplied side of the communication service point would be on chapter 7. Sometimes we look at 805. The new 805 is communication circuits. Well, what is a communication circuit? Everything communicates. What is PoE? When do you use 725? When do you use 805? And so we're trying to make this so this is a lot simpler on the user of the NEC. Why is chapter 8 independent? Given the fact that we are no longer have the Ma Bell concept, why are we doing those things? And so this is a long-term approach to make this a lot easier for inspectors to know exactly where they inspect. And I think, Donny, you've sat in on these meetings and you've basically said the same thing. I really am confused sometimes when I go out in the field to try to inspect and what I'm required to do.
Yeah, there was finding that point was never easy. It still is not easy. And I think the committees are trying. I was communicating with somebody about some of those pictures I sent to you. I was communicating with Robert Jones about the service point in the assisted living facility we're doing right now. Where is the we've got communication stuff that comes in on the first floor. Then we've got communications that extend to each one of the the individuals' tenant rooms, which are really like apartments, and you look at it all in the room downstairs, and you look at it all up through the building, and you don't know where the chapter 8 stops and the chapter 7 starts. And so it's this could be, I mean, this is going to have to evolve. You're right. It can't happen. It won't all happen overnight, but there's a lot of work to do there. And, you know, the whole concept of it's low voltage, that's an interesting term as I've visited with other AEI chapters and groups around the country. It's always interesting to hear what people think low voltage is. So, and with the new technologies, the digital electricity, is that is that low voltage? So I think this will be a real benefit to everybody in the field. I've talked with some of the members of the State Electrical Contractors Board in Alabama because they had historically just said, well, we're not really interested in low voltage. And I was telling them that, you know, with POE lighting right now, their job may end at the service point for you know, the service disconnect on the building. There may not be anything but low voltage left, you know, as we move forward. And that's an exaggeration, but clearly low voltage will be used for a lot of stuff we never thought we'd see.
And I think, you know, the points you just brought up, I think this for the, you know, the IAI, this to me is incredibly important in the future because we want to make sure that inspectors know what they're inspecting. And if we do not try to get a handle on this, the code might become irrelevant in such a fast growing area. And so we need to make sure we make this clear and concise and work on this over the next 2 to 3 cycles. Tom, do you want to go to the next slide? And I think this is one of this is kind of the next 3 slides are kind of the culmination of and why we're doing what we're doing. You know, if you look at these things here, what I tasked all these chairs to do when they first started their task groups was go back to your group, ask them what would they like to see long-term in the NEC. You know, I asked Tom to go to his renewable energy group and say, okay, if you were writing this code from scratch, how would you lay out your renewable energy? You know, I went to the medium voltage and said, if you had your druthers and you were starting from scratch, how would you lay out your medium voltage? And so every one of them came back with a recommendation. And if you look up here on the screen, you know, in chapter 6 and 7, you know, we have renewable energy articles that are in chapter 6, 690, 691, 692, 694. We have renewable energy things in 705, 706, 770, 710, and 712. And so we have altered other sources like generators and batteries in chapter 4. And so we cover these things in all different parts and all different chapters of the NEC. And how can we improve this long term? The structure has been around for a long time. And so the recommendation from the renewable energy folks was, let's try to move things out of chapter 7 and let's group them. And so, Tom, did you want to briefly explain what your recommendation was for the renewable energy?
Yeah, sure. So we're taking 445. Well, what we did was we took 705 and 710 and 712, and we said, you know, let's combine those together. So we combined 705, 710, and 712 into one new article, which we are calling 689, I believe. So 689 is going to be like the new general requirements, which will be the 705, 710, and 712 combined together. We left 690 where it was at, 691 where it's at, 692 where it's at, and 694. The new 693, I believe, is going to be it might be the generators. We might have moved generators up to 445 up to 693 to build that sequence out. And then we pulled in, what's the battery article? I can't remember that number.
480.
480. We pulled 480 up as well, somewhere in there in those numbers. And then we moved the not elevator.
Fire pumps.
Fire pumps. Thank you. We moved the fire pumps over to. We said really fire pumps probably belongs in chapter 7. Now it was just a suggestion, so we said we got to move it because fire pumps was in our way from a numbering perspective. So we said, that probably belongs, and I think we went with 703, but it could go anywhere in chapter 7 because it seems to align with emergency type systems. And so you saw 710 go away, 712, and then we took 706 energy storage and we moved that over into chapter 6 into that 690 series. So what you have highlighted in yellow, we moved that into chapter 6 to fill out that series. But what you're not showing on here is what we did with 445 and 480 or whatever it was for batteries. And we said that should be up there as well. So that's sort of our quick overview. I don't think I missed anything. I think that's sort of what we did.
And that's not necessarily say that they will, the correlating committee still is responsible for article placement. But I think the correlating committee needs to kind of listen and understand where the recommendations for some of these task groups, and I think we need to long-term look at the importance of the renewable energy industry, and we need to try to group things together. So they're easier to find for the user as things get more technical. So I think that was the recommendation of the renewable energy task group, to kind of get those grouped in one location.
Now, what we did too, I mentioned 445 and whatnot, but we didn't say we need to change purview over those because, the guys who deal with generators should take care of generators. That's panel 13. So we weren't suggesting that we reallocate that now panel 4 is going to govern those other articles. It's just we just want to move them around. That's all. Just want to make sure that's clear.
And then we also we put Robert Jones, who's chair of panel 3. We put some task groups together to look at things in chapter 7. Robert Jones's group has made a recommendation to look at 727 instrumentation tray cable. People looked at that a wiring method. They got with people from panel 6 and said, let's move that out and put that in the wiring methods of chapter 3. He looked at 720 and said 720 circuits and equipment operating at less than 50 volts. And I think that was put into the code a long time ago. And I think that dealt with a certain type of equipment on farms, if I'm correct. What was it called there, Donnie?
I think it was farm lighting.
Yeah, farm lighting. So that's why that was put in the code. And so they are submitting a public input to delete 720. And I've seen public inputs to move 770 to chapter 8. And so what you're seeing is if we can relocate some of these things, we think that we will make some, and I don't want to steal Donnie's thunder because he's going to talk about some of these things, but I think we need to make progress. So this will help the NFPA link, which is that new digital format. I think it'll help the user. I think it'll get things where they're supposed to be situated. And the ones in the blue have to deal with limited energy. So we're putting together a group to say, do we put the stuff on the supply side in chapter 8 and the customer side in chapter 7? Do we move everything up to chapter 8 and change the title? So there's a lot of work to be done, but this is just the beginning of improving and making the code relevant over the long term.
Hey, Larry, we got a comment in from Jeff Grassi. He said, or not Jeff Grassi, Dean Austin said, put fire pumps by fire alarms as a thought, as a suggestion.
And I think that that is a very relevant comment. I think what you see though is as we make these changes and we move stuff out of 7 into 6 and we delete, like, let's say if the code making panel 3 agrees to delete 720 and move 727 out into chapter 3, what you end up seeing is that chapter 7 basically starts to become a life safety chapter with emergency, legally required, and optional standby, if we get fire pumps up there, things like that, fire resistive cables, fire alarm systems. And so you can kind of see the progression of these task groups and what they're getting done and how things are evolving. And it kind of, I always say water seeks its own level. And I think some of these things are flushing themselves out, which will help make a more relevant code in the future. And with that, I think if we move to the next slide, one of the things is we took all these recommendations and we're taking recommendations from the renewable folks and from the medium voltage folks and from the limited energy group. And we're saying, okay, well, how do we put this all together? And so one of the things that I asked Donny to do, in which Donny's going to kind of take over from here and talk about some of these things. But once we make these changes, what is in the best interest of the NEC structure long-term, and how can we set this up for the future? So Donny, having said that, I'll turn this over to you.
Okay, Larry, thanks. This is the first cycle that I've been part of the correlating committee, and I've enjoyed it so far. And like I've done in other places when I came in, I don't have many answers, but I have a lot of questions. And so there was things that I've always wondered why things were located where they are today, how they got there, and then wondered, do we have things grouped, in the best way for the user? And so I started looking at 90.3 right out of the chute, and I said, how long has this structure that we have? How long has that been there? And it looks like it probably started either in the 1937 or the 1940 edition of the NEC. I have a copy of the 1935, and the structure wasn't there then, and I have a copy of the 1940, and it was there in 1940. So, it happened somewhere along in there. And when I looked back at at that 1940 edition, there was chapters 1 through 4 applied generally, and then chapter 5 was special occupancies. Chapter 6 was special equipment. Chapter 7 was special conditions. Chapter 8 was communications. And chapter 5 at that point had 5 articles. Today, in the 2020 NEC, chapter 5 has 27 articles. When I looked at chapter 6 in 1940, there were 7 articles. In the 2020 edition, chapter 6 had 27 articles. When I looked at chapter 7 in 1940, there was 4 articles. And when I looked at it in the 2020, there's 15 articles. When I looked at chapter 8 in communications in 1940, there was 2 articles, and now there's 6. So I started looking at the buckets, and I'm thinking, are our buckets getting full? Do we really have room? And how, I'm sure that there was a lot of work done when articles were placed through the years. But you start to wonder, is this structure the best for 2020? And is it going to be the best for 2030? And is it going to be the best structure for 2040? And it may be. This structure may be fine, and we may, after we think about this and talk about it and consider it, we may decide that the structure we have now is perfect. But I don't think we should, what I would like to see is for us to at least think about it and have those discussions. And if we talk about this and we decide that that the renewable energy group is run off the track, then we should put the train back on the track. But if we decide that makes sense to group those things together, then we should do that. We should do what's best for the NEC going forward. So, a couple of the other things that I had looked at when just looking at the articles and looking at the structure, I was trying to look at scopes of articles. I was trying to look at how things fit where they are today. A couple of the other things that I had looked at was the 90.3 structure. Are we even paying attention to that as we do work today, or do we have things in chapters 5, 6, and 7 that are really chapter 1 through 4 requirements? So I think we have to think about the structure as we work, as we think about the 2023 code cycle and the 2026 and the 2029. And we have to continue to think, is this the best structure going forward? At the correlating committee, we talked about a lot of new technology, things that didn't exist. There's things right now that in the NEC that didn't exist in 1940, and there's clearly going to have expanded use of DC technology. We're going to have expanded use of PoE. Probably going to see pulse DC. We've got expanded use of frequencies other than 60 hertz. We had some people brought that up at the correlating committee meeting. How do we address that? We have expanded use of circuit integrity cable. We've got expanded use of prefabrication. What about wireless technology? Which one of those buckets does wireless really go in? What about the impact of the energy code? What about the impact of reconditioning or the use of used equipment? You've got a lot of things. And then when I looked at chapter 8, the chapter 8 bucket, Larry talked about it a little earlier. In 1940, from what I've read and what I can find, Ma Bell was chapter 8. And, Ma Bell owned the telephone in your house. They did the installation, and they owned the cabling in your house or your business, either one. You probably leased your phone from Ma Bell. So those kind of things are not real anymore. So does that impact the way we treat chapter 8 right now? Its independence from the rest of the code. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I'm not saying that I have the answers. I'm just the provider of the questions. But I think those are things we have to talk about. When you look, when I first started thinking about that entire structure, I thought about the terms general and the term special. And my guess is if we went back to 1940 and looked at those articles that were in chapters 5, 6, and 7, and 8, at that time, general and special was probably very obvious. But I wonder, is it as obvious as it was before? We talk about Cat 5 and Cat 6 cable. Is that really special, or is that general in today's world? And 10 years from now, will it be special, or will it be general? I just think there's a lot of things that we probably want to think about and collectively decide. This is not about. It's not about Larry as much as I like Larry. It's really not about Larry. It's certainly not about me. It's about us. It's about our industry. And we want to provide the best set of regulations, the best document, the best standard. We want to do what's best for the electrical industry holistically. And that might require us to think, that might require us to adjust the structure. Maybe the adjustment is, a change in the name of the chapters, or maybe it's a change in the name of the articles, or maybe it's a change in the scope of some of the articles. It could be a lot of things, but I don't think we can continue to do justice to our industry by not having the discussion. And that's one of the things that, with these task groups, these 3 or 4 task groups that Larry's put together this cycle, we have generated discussion without a doubt. And so, I'm curious about the people on the call other than Larry and Thomas and I, you know, your thoughts about the structure. There's some text Larry's got on his slide there. It says, these are some questions that I've asked. Is a control system for a permanent amusement attraction? Do you really think of an occupancy when you think of that? It maybe it's just the wrong title, or maybe the scope of the article is maybe that needs adjusting. But a control system for a permanent amusement attraction just doesn't seem like an occupancy to me. Our electrified truck parking spaces, is that really a piece of electrical equipment? Now, maybe that's not what we really mean. Maybe we're not talking about the truck parking space. Maybe we're only talking about the equipment. We'd have to go and look at that. But right now, that's a Chapter 6 article. Is a modular data center, is that really a piece of equipment? The data center, what is the data center? Is electroplating, is that a piece of equipment? Swimming pools, and if you want to stretch a little bit further, what about an artificial or natural body of water? Is that really a piece of equipment? And you think first and you say, well, it's about the equipment at the artificial or natural body of water. But if you really believe that, take a look through 682 and see what some of the requirements are. And like you say, maybe the structure thing is that we get the requirements where they go and the equipment stays there. I don't know what the answer is, but it's certainly, I think it's an interesting question if we look at ourselves and ask ourselves that and try to answer it. See what's on the next slide, Thomas.
Okay, before I do that, Donny, we got
Gary
Line.
You got all kind of people saying, put that idiot out to pasture. He's crazy.
No. Gary Line says he says that he is. I don't want to use the word old. I'm going to say he is wise, and he doesn't like change. But all of this makes sense to him. So I think that's a what I'm seeing too is even Ryan Jackson had some notes over here on the on my YouTube channel. He said 90.3 is almost becoming meaningless. The style manual tells us to avoid things that are already covered by 90.3, but later articles refuse to allow 90.3 do what it does. So to do what it does. So there's I think from what I'm seeing so far, just at least a couple of feedback comments before I went to the next slide. I thought I'd give you that. Just give you some of that feedback. You're not crazy, at least I don't want to go that far. I'm just going to say, at least I don't think you're that crazy.
I've been crazy for a long time, so I'm comfortable there. So the last side, the last slide we have here, I think is, they're not answers, they're questions. Where does it fit? Where does POE go? I mean, is it special equipment? Is it general equipment? Is it equipment at all? Is it a condition? What is general? I thought I knew, and what's special, and I thought that would be an easy question. So pulse DC or digital electricity, artificial intelligence, what about wireless technology? What chapter does that fit into? What about Internet of Things? Cybersecurity. Are they NEC items at all? Do we just give it away? Is that the right answer, is to just let that stuff go somewhere else? So I think that, the goal for this task group was not to force anything to happen, but I think the goal for the task group was to to ask questions and then try to get your engagement, try to get the industry's engagement to say, hey, what we have right now is perfect, leave it alone, or we can improve it, and help us find the best way to improve it for everybody. Not just for not just for the old folks, but for the folks that are going to be here in another 20 years, still trying to figure out where the requirements go. Do we have the right structure for today and for tomorrow? So, Larry, I'll slide over to the side and let you jump back in.
No, I think you've done an excellent job, and I think that's, I think to Ryan Jackson's point of 90.3, I think sometimes we need to make sure that we do a better job of correlation. And sometimes I think that we allow things to maybe, go into the NEC without looking at 90.3. And we allow maybe the RV industry to duplicate material that's up in their chapter or their article in chapter 5. And sometimes we allow the renewable energy people to, create requirements that they don't want to really look at what a feeder is in a branch circuit. So I think the concept is we need to make sure we communicate. I think that's the key that I've learned on all these task groups. It is difficult to try to put together such a vast national electrical code that's used, in so many places across the world, that we need to communicate and communicate more than just the first draft and second draft. And I think when we do that communication, we will have a better product. And like Donny said, some of these things have been there for a long time. And how do we make it easier for the user of the code as we move forward, and to make the best product, to make it the best for the electrical industry, to make sure that, it's easier to understand, things are in the proper location. It keeps the electrical industry going. It keeps the inspectors going, and it helps everybody out. So, I'm hopeful that, we have a lot of great people. Since I started this a year ago, I'm just really impressed with the amount of talent and intellect that people, when they go on these task groups, and the passion they share, what, Donny has brought to just what he has gone over. He's been around and a lot longer than I have, and he understands a lot of these issues far better than I have. And so it's all of this dialogue from all these people is really beneficial to making the code, to improving it over time.
Larry,
So-
one of the other things that I think we all have to admit and think about is, and we probably want to do is our best to try to be as uniform as possible. When we think about those, the uses of grounding, one is an easy one to pick on, but if you wander back into chapter 5, 6, and 7, it's amazing how many people, how many committees, and how many articles have references to sizing the equipment grounding conductor when it's already covered in chapter 2. Those chapters right now are meant to supplement or modify the requirements in chapters 1 through 4, but in some places we decide we need to repeat that, but not everywhere. And so you get folks out in the field that are using the book, and they're working with the NEC every day in the field, and they're saying, well, in this article, for this specific piece of this article, it says I need to use 250, 122 to size my equipment grounding conductor, or 250, 118 to select my equipment grounding conductor. But this other place, it doesn't say that. So does that mean I don't have to use 250, 122 to size that? And so we confuse people with inconsistency. So that's a pretty common thing that I see back there, and I try to think about submitting PIs when I see them. But I'm like everybody else, we all got a day job, and so you forget. Another interesting thing Larry and I had talked about the other day was, the way we look at branch circuits and feeders, the requirement for continuous loads to be to look at those at 125% and non-continuous to look at 100%. And if you wander even through chapter 4, and especially when you get to 5, 6, and 7, you start to see that some places repeated and in other places we don't repeat it. So what does that mean? What does that mean to the person that's in the field trying to use the book, that doesn't have access to an AEI meeting, or doesn't have access to an NFPA meeting, or doesn't have access to a code panel meeting? What does that mean to them? It means confusion. And I think that all these things, that if we continue to talk about them and identify them, then we can have a chance of making this better.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I said, I think that it goes down to communication and talking amongst panels. A lot of panels, we have some cross pollination of the topics they cover, and I think that over time this communication will pay off. We see a lot of these technologies that are coming up to the forefront, as you mentioned, digital electricity, the Internet of Things, things like that. People are submitting public inputs for cybersecurity. And as we get more and more technical, we need to make sure that we are still somewhat user friendly. No, it'll be an interesting cycle. I think what's interesting is, given this pandemic, you never know how things will turn out. I know that I think in the first draft stage of the 2020 NEC, we had approximately 3,700 public inputs. And this cycle, I think we have approximately 4,000. So, I think I think people are energized, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this upcoming cycle. And so Tom, I really appreciate you inviting us to talk about these things, because I think these things are extremely important to the relevancy and the future of the NEC.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
Tom,
a good discussion.
I'm curious, do you have a way where the people that are on and listening, if they have ideas, where they could share that back with us, just so we would know?
So one of the things I did, Donny, was I put a note out to everybody that if we want to get somebody in the queue and talking, I can give them a call. All they got to do is send me an email to tsdn QUE at gmail.com. So we've gotten some good comments in here. So we've got Dean Austin is saying this makes a lot of sense, but I don't see anybody stepping up saying, hey, give me a call, I want to voice my opinion online. So I haven't had that yet, but it looks like we're getting comments and people talking. No one's saying that what you guys are talking about is doesn't sound good. So
They're still trying to understand what I said.
Yeah, that's right. That's Alabama. That's Shelby County talk. But I could try to translate that for everybody. So, what I can do is here's what I'll do. I will watch this here. Where's it at? There I am, right here. Right. So I can do this, Donny. I will put myself up here in the corner, right? And then when you talk, I'll do the sign language for everybody. Or you can say a few words and then you stop and then I'll repeat it in English.
Yeah.
That's not too bad. No, but I think this was really good dialogue. I'm just going to check the email over here real quick. I keep going away from my microphone. I think Ryan Jackson's been audible, and I think what I'll do. Hold on one second. I might take and how about we try to get Ryan Jackson? You want to see if we can get Ryan on the phone?
Sure.
Bring him in.
Let's do it. Hold on. I'm not going to say his phone number out loud, so Ryan, if you're listening, we're calling, buddy. Can you hear that?
I think we can hear that.
Hi, it's Ryan.
Ryan Jackson?
Tom, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good, brother. And you're live right now.
Are we live? Okay. All right. So, well, Donny keeps on throwing this lure out saying, man, I wish people would call and I wish people would give input. And these lures keep splashing right next to my large largemouth bass like mouth. So I figured I would swallow it. Let me say that I love what I'm hearing. I really do. I absolutely love pretty much everything that you guys have been talking about. So and I can't hear you guys, by the way. I've got it on mute so we don't get a feedback. So you guys can say anything you want about me, and I won't even know. So, but yeah, I love what I'm hearing. Really excited about it. I mean, I'm a code nerd. I mean, I teach code and write code, and kind of live it and breathe it. And I love what I'm hearing. I think it's great stuff. The medium voltage stuff and everything else. I've kind of said a couple of things that were on my mind about 90.3, but the one that I didn't really talk about is 90.2, which is the scope of the code. I can see you guys laughing. I'm watching you in real time laughing, so I have no idea what you guys are saying. But 90.2a says that the code covers the installation of conductors and equipment. And a couple of code cycles ago, we added installation and removal of conductors and equipment. And I think that really clarifies that what the code covers is what we install. It covers installations. It doesn't cover maintenance. It does not cover usage. According to the scope of the code, it's an installation standard. And I think so much, especially in the back half of Chapter 6, we're starting to lose that idea. We can't cover how a person maintains energy storage system. We certainly can't enforce it. And I think we're seeing a lot of things coming into the code book that don't necessarily fall under the purview of the NEC. Another example is in Article 406, we added single plus separable connectors, which is a welcome sight. Very glad to see those. But it says they can only be used by qualified persons. And I was an inspector for a dozen years. Donny, you're an inspector. I don't know how I'm supposed to enforce that. How do I enforce that the guy plugging in and unplugging a separable single pole connector is qualified? So I would love to see a bit of an emphasis on 90.2 and making sure that what we put into the code actually falls within the scope and within the purview of what the code says it covers.
Cool. That was pretty good.
You asked. Listen, I was perfectly content to just be here and be quiet and watch you guys, but you kept on asking.
I hear you. Yeah, when you first started, I had the volume up way too loud, but now I've just fixed that. But so I hope Larry and Donny heard that dialogue. He's shaking his head. He's shaking his head yes. So.
Okay, good. Rolling their eyes, so that's good too. That's definitely a good sign.
Absolutely.
So there's a couple.
Well, perfect. I would be very interested to hear what you guys have to say, but I do want to emphasize that what I've heard so far, I'm very excited about. Writing the code is not an easy task. And I thank both of these guys for their commitments, both to the live stream tonight and just in general to the industry. So we all know it's a thankless task. So you guys don't hear enough how good of a job you guys do.
We appreciate that, Ryan. So I'm gonna let Donny and Larry take it from there.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks, man.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right, bro.
Donny, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so the maintenance question, I actually, in my notes for tonight, I had written down, maintenance. And I think that's an interesting thing. I think we've had some discussions in some other arenas about maintenance. We've had some discussions in the task groups related to bodies of water about maintenance, and how in many cases proper installations are safe, and then they over time they become less safe. And, and so one of the things that, and I agree right now, I mean, the scope seems to tell us it's an installation document, but we do have some requirements. And interestingly, one of them is in, Article 680 for swimming pools. We added a section in the 2020 cycle that talks about re-inspection, if you will, a periodic inspection of systems that install for swimming pools. And you have to, if you look at older marina installations, what you realize is those are very harsh environments, and something that could have been installed completely correct and equipment that was built to the proper product standards and was functional and was safe, at some point in time becomes less safe. And so I don't know if that's an item that, you know, I don't know how to best address that. I'm not saying that what we did in 680 was right or wrong. I think it gives AHJs some ability to talk to their administrative folks, their management, about the need to go back out and look at an installation again after the fact. I'm not naive enough to believe that a lot of jurisdictions want to do that for free. And I'm not naive enough to believe that a lot of owners want to pay you to come back out there again. But interestingly enough, the health department's doing it with the pools, public pools, doing it with the water already. So I think that I think it's a really good discussion item, Ryan. I think it's something we you know, we should think about and make a good decision for that also. That's a really good comment.
We got someone else who wants to talk about moving some things around, Dean Austin. So I'm going to give him a call right now and bring him in. Okay. Here we go. We're going. We're dialing Dean Austin. This is like who used to do this?
Hi, this is Dean.
Hey Dean, how's it going, buddy?
Good.
Excellent. I'm just going to get your volume set correct. So you brought up an issue or a question about moving some articles around. Why don't you talk about it?
Okay. I'm going to put you on mute here so I don't lose everything.
Yeah. This is like I can remember like Rush Limbaugh and Croup used to say, "Turn your radio down."
Yep.
Go ahead, sir.
All right. Yeah, I had a couple of ideas. I think this is great. By the way, my name is Dean Austin. I'm the chief of the electrical division for the state of Michigan. So I'm the head regulator at the state. And there's a couple of things that I thought that, you know, just kind of always seemed out of place, you know. 626, 630 electric welders, you know, electrified truck spaces are kind of, you know, they're talking about equipment. Those are actually equipment that is, you know, being utilized either by a trucker or, you know, a welder, you know, and you're wiring it up. So I kind of thought those always belonged in maybe chapter 5. And then even 669 where you have electroplating. Well, that's a similar process to the painting and dipping and spray boot, you know, spray areas, which is in article or chapter 5. You know, so maybe some of those combinations, putting some of the like processes together. But I'm really excited. I'm new to code making panel number 1, so I'll be working with some of you on here, and I'm excited about that.
Oh, excellent. So you're new to code making panel. You said code making panel 1, right?
Yep, brand new. Yep, for 2023. So, and good friends with Dave Williams, and he's encouraged me all the years to get involved and do something.
Awesome.
And I think, you know, Dean makes a great point. You know,
Those
I think
are my
that,
thoughts, and you know, I probably will have more as I go.
All right. So hold on one second. Larry's going to comment on that. I'm just going to just hold on.
no, I think Dean makes some great points. I think that, you know, you've heard from Ryan, you've heard from Dean, and I think sometimes when people put, you know, they submit new articles and new articles go into the NEC, we try to fit them in the existing structure. And to Donnie's point is the structure relevant for 2020, 2030, or 2040? And so what are we doing that we can make things better in the future and make some, better decisions on where we're placing things in a long-term perspective? And, Dean raised some very valid points, and everybody has. And so, we want to put some thought into this. Not saying we've done it in the past wrong, but I think things are moving so fast that we need to just look at this and put some extra set of eyes on things as we move forward.
Cool beans. Well, that worked out okay, huh?
And I think the other point that Ryan Jackson made about the maintenance, I think what you're seeing though over time is kind of the merging of 70E, 70B, and the National Electric Code NFPA 70. Years ago, you never thought of 70E as that was the safety document. We never wanted to bring things over from 70E. National Electric Code was an installation document. And, now what you're seeing is products are coming into the code that cover incident energy and worker safety and things, NFPA 70B is going from a guide to a electrical maintenance standard. And so these things are becoming more and more important. Like Donnie mentioned, maintaining marinas, there's a huge safety hazard there. And so I just see over time, a lot of these things, the so-called NFPA trilogy, they're starting to merge into kind of everybody's looking at these things holistically as a group.
Yeah, you brought up you like the trilogy, and I look at 70B, 70E, and the National Electrical Code as that trilogy, and 70B is going through a transformation right now, isn't it, Larry? They're moving over to a standard.
Yes, and they're they are really making they're rewriting the entire standard, or the standard, the entire guide, and I think they'll be done here. They kind of delayed it, I think, and moved it back a year. But that is there a lot of good information in there. I use that document actually about trying to, when I have to meet with a client, to talk about what is the proper amount of time to either do some infrared technology and thermal scans, or to look at maintaining switchboards. So I think there are tremendous amount of things that are in there that are beneficial to the electrical industry and to the user of both the NEC and the 70E.
Cool beans. And I saw we have Dan Neeser on YouTube. He made a comment. He said that he believes maintenance is something we should touch in the NEC, especially for critical systems. CMP 13 has added some requirements in the past cycles. But, Larry, and you too, Donny, I mean, I've always struggled with maintenance in the National Electrical Code in general, because we do have 70B, and it's hard to, I mean, how do you, is it the right place for maintenance? Is the National Electrical Code, the installation requirement, the right place for maintenance requirements?
Donnie, you want to go first?
So yeah, I think that I think we can look at that and think about it from a codes and standards standpoint, and I think you could easily say that maintenance doesn't belong. I mean, you could justify that. I could get on that side of the argument if I wanted to. You could also look at it from the customer's standpoint and from a safety standpoint. And Thomas, I know you've done some marina inspections with me where NFPA 303 doesn't get adopted, and there's no teeth anywhere. And be it right or wrong, the way to get something enforced right now is typically to get it in the NEC. And if you want to maintain the equipment, that's the path of least resistance to get it addressed, is to put it in the NEC. That may not be the right way to do it. I'm not saying that it is, but if you want to get that marina equipment maintained, maybe you want to say, maybe you want to give the owner an option to say, look, you're going to replace your equipment every 10 years or every 15 years or every 45 years or whatever the number you want to pick. You can either replace it or you can maintain it. And, it is the hammer,
Yeah.
right or wrong.
Yeah. Alfio Tracy is commenting on Facebook, and he made the statement. He says, 70B is maintenance, which this is the discussion we're having right now. And Alfio said, and I don't know where his head's at, and I've heard the same thing. They say that the NEC ends when the installation is approved, and then he's asking about, like, how does the AHJ enforce it? So is the AHJ, I mean, you can enforce the National Electrical Code after the initial installation. It may not be the electrical inspector for the county doing it. It may be somebody else, right?
That's right.
So like in
think so.
healthcare, in healthcare and some of those systems that have those ongoing review, you have another agency coming in and looking at the installation periodically. And I think they have to follow the National Electrical Code as well, even though it's a maintenance procedures. And I know we got 70B, but if the National Electrical Code says you need to maintain it, then I think it carries some weight. To your point, Larry, you have any comments on that one?
Well, I think people made a good point that, we want to make sure that each document has a certain purview, and we try to stay within those purview lines. But I think there are times that, we could sit there and say that all incident energy should not remain, should not come into the National Electric Code. But, there's been some benefit to safety benefit to 240.87 and 67 with that technology. There are some benefits to what Donny said about bringing in some things for the marina. I think Tommy said it is the hammer. I mean, there are certain times that I think that it is warranted, and there's certain times it's not. But I think the marina one, it is, with the tragedies that have occurred on quite a frequent basis, I think that there needs to be something done, and I think that's why you see that coming into the NEC. So again, we try to make sure that we keep those things separate as best as we can, but you are seeing kind of an evolution with the three documents, and the popularity of those documents over time.
Yep, absolutely. I'm watching some dialogue. Tim McClintock, he made a statement. He says the NEC is the most widely adopted code in the United States, and it doesn't provide. He says the NEC does not provide requirements for inspections. So. You could tell there's some good points to your point, Donny, on both sides of this fence.
Yeah, and the good thing about this forum tonight and other forums like this is that we can talk about it.
Yeah,
we may not all come up with the exact same answer, but having the discussion enhances safety, and that's why we're all here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what the R&R Ranch is all about, right? This is what we do in the R&R Ranch. We argue with each other. We get a few more drinks, and then we argue a little bit more. We don't argue. We debate and discuss.
There's no arguing allowed. It's just discussion.
And Steve Froming is heard from. I love it.
Break time.
It's break time. Yeah, so Steve is on another call, so he broke away. Cool beans. All right, so let's take a look and see if anybody is. We got. So Dean Austin did a great job. So we had Dean Austin on the phone. We had Ryan Jackson on the phone, and he's and Steve's got 2 minutes left on his break. I love it. And we've got. So I'll just give you guys a little feeling. I've been watching the live stream on people who are viewing. We've been up into the 30s. into the late 30s. We're at 26 right now. We've got about 94 playbacks, and so we've got a lot going on in the chat. There's a lot of people talking about the Michigan chapter, all that good stuff, and they're dialoguing with each other. So it's been a good session so far, in my opinion. We've got some good interaction. All right, what's the next topic, man? Anybody out there want to shout in? Want to give a call?
And I think too, over this cycle, you'll see, a lot of other things. I mean, we only touched on, those 4 task groups. Those were long range task groups, but there's been some significant work done this cycle on the reconditioning task group. That was one of the largest ones I've ever seen. There was 22 people in that group. That was chaired by Scott Harding from IEC. Did a fantastic job. He probably did that over a 9-month period. David Hittinger did some really good work on copper clad. You'll see people trying to determine an ampacity for 14 gauge copper clad. As many of you know, copper clad is 10% aluminum, or 10% copper, 90% aluminum, trying to use that in dwelling units, coming up with an ampacity for that. In today's world, there's a lot of the stuff that we do in homes really has little load on it. So they're looking to try to make inroads on that with copper clad. So, we've had things with the home healthcare. There was a task group to try to look at putting requirements in the NEC, because more and more people, as the population of the United States ages, and not just in the United States, but around the world, more and more people are doing healthcare at home. And so we have a task group that I think is going to put some requirements back in the annex to address some of those things, because that is a situation where maybe the home was built and it might not be set up for home health care. So I think there's going to do some things for an annex. So there is just a lot of different things. Also, Tom, you chaired a group with Dean Hunter, which was to try to correlate 682 and I think 555 marinas. We have things that are out there that have different GFCI requirements for marinas and man-made bodies of water. And so we have different requirements for equipotential planes and bonding planes. And so you've tried to take that and look at that and try to bring some cohesiveness to those two. And so just a lot of great work that was done this cycle, that by just numerous people on these task groups, trying to improve things. And we also tried to, we have the healthcare industry. We have the healthcare industry, NFPA 99. They have different terminology for emergency standby systems and things like that. And we put a group together to try to come up with some terminology that is kind of, goes across multiple standards as far as 99, NFPA 70, things of that nature. So just a lot of great work done by just a lot of different people.
Yeah, and Larry, that bodies of water task group, Donny Cook, Donny was on there as well, and out of that effort, we're going to end up having a meeting with the Research Foundation. I think you're helping setting that up, and we're going to get a smaller group together, because as we go into this is I guess a good point of discussion too, is how the Research Foundation weighs in on some of these code changes that we see. The Research Foundation has been very influential in various areas, like the marina stuff that we saw with the ground fall protection of equipment. So we've identified a few areas that we want to get some eyes on, and the Research Foundation, we're going to have a meeting with them as well, and maybe get an effort to go together to provide some technical data to Code Making Panel 7 as they continue that journey forward with, I use the word journey, Larry.
That's your favorite word.
It's my word, baby. But in any case, Donny, you're heavily involved with the Research Foundation. You want to just talk a little bit about what they do and what that role, how they play?
Yeah, for every code making panel, there's always work that we'd like to see, and in some cases, individually, it becomes very difficult for us to substantiate things. It becomes difficult for us to find information that's probably already out there somewhere. But you have to be able to find it. And so, they do a lot of really good stuff with some colleges and universities. They'll go to a university and say, we're looking for accidents that happen, whether it's at a marina or a swimming pool, or can we come up with some data to see how often this happens? And they could do that with most anything if somebody just posed the question to them. And it becomes important enough. They have an electrical group, advisory group that goes through and prioritizes the items that come in, and that helps them to be able to focus on the things that as an industry we believe are the most important. But yeah, there's a lot of things I know, especially for me as an AHJ, and for a lot of contractors and a lot of other people in the industry, electricians, when do you have time to do that research, and when could you accomplish that? And so they have some resources to be able to help do those kind of things, and they can be a big benefit to us, because in many cases a committee will not move an item forward just because there's uncertainty about, is it real? How often is it happening? And they can help in those kind of situations. They do research to do a lot of different things. So if you're on a committee, or if you have an idea that you think warrants that, you just have to get it to the folks and get the research foundation to take a look at it.
Sweet. Alfio, I missed Alfio's request, so hopefully he's out there. I'm going to try him on his phone. He gave his number, and we're going to give him a call and see. I know he was doing some dialoguing on the enforcement of not reconditioning, maintenance and whatnot. So we're going to just try him real quick. You guys mind?
Oh,
let's try it. One ringy dingy.
Oh, that was quick, Tom.
Alfio, is that you?
It is. You can call me Al. Do you hear me? Yep.
All right. See if I can hear you.
Yep. I'm here. Testing.
All right. I'm getting you now. Go ahead. Why don't you?
All right.
You had some things to say about.
So I just wanted to comment on the voltage or lack of voltage limitation in the NEC. So right now, it's regardless of voltage. We do have some requirements for medium voltage cabling and clearances and things of that nature, and that usually max out at 35,000 volts. But as far as the high voltage, the NEC is way behind the curve, and in my opinion, it really doesn't line up with the scope of the NEC, which is the practical safeguarding of personnel and equipment. With that said, I think there should be a distinctive line in the sand, if you would, to where the NEC can actually provide the safeguarding of personnel and equipment to a voltage rating. So obviously 35,000 is within our code book right now. Anything above that, I would think, an IEEE standard or the NESC is more apt to address those issues. So I guess my question is, wouldn't it be better if the NEC had a voltage limitation?
Ooh, a voltage limitation. So what do you guys think about that, Larry and Donny?
So my first I'll answer that. I want to ask a question for Al, but it's been interesting because
I can't hear anybody. Okay.
Hold on one second.
Well, Tom, before you get Al off the call, why don't you ask him, what's he think of the medium voltage work that we're doing? Does he agree with the way we are trying to break that out and improve it?
Okay, Alfio.
Yeah. So as far as
One second. So Al,
Yep.
what Larry is saying, you saw what the work that you saw the work that the task group is doing for medium voltage. What do you think of that so far?
so I think we're a little spread out as far as the over 1,000 volts. We got the equipment in 490, and then we got the cabling in chapter 3. So we are kind of all over the place. Our part twos are over 1,000 volts are in each particular article, like for instance, services. You got to get to section 200 before it kicks into the the medium voltage issues. So each article addresses it in its own particulars, and then you have the equipment, which like I said is out in 490, and then you have the cabling, which is in 300. So it's kind of all over the place. But I guess to my point, should there be a line where we don't venture beyond? As far as what Larry was saying, I like where it's going. It gets better every code cycle, but we're still behind the curve. So we still need catching up. The work they're doing is fantastic, and it needs to continue.
Well, I appreciate Al's comments. And I think that the task group that we put together for medium voltage, you can see the passion in what they're trying to do. And I think they're going to make great progress in improving that over time. On Al's comments, I do think that what's interesting, as far as when I think of medium voltage, I think of 2,400 to 35,000. I think above that is, and this is just me talking, and maybe Donnie has a different experience, but I don't think the NEC tends to go above 35,000. And, but I think that, if we look at 490, we talk about high voltage, we talk about medium voltage, we talk about different things. And I think to Al's point is we need to probably improve the terminology. But my understanding is, I don't know if the code, we have a lot of things in 311 right now for cables, but I don't think we tend to go above 35,000 like Al has indicated. I don't know if Donnie, you want to expand on that or not.
Yeah, so I think that he's right in that the code is not adequate. But when you look at 90.2, if the customer owns it, we claim responsibility for it, whether we have the requirements to deal with it or not. And I think he brings up a really good point. I think that we have to decide, do we really want that? And if we don't take it, who's going to take it? Because it's not the utilities anymore. Now you may say, well, we can still take it, but we need to use the utility standard. That's a different discussion. And that discussion has, I've heard people say that before. If you look at, I think it's what Article 390 or somewhere along in there that we added several years back for overhead distribution work. I mean, that really came out of that whole discussion. There was, we were doing methane gas wells at that time, and the customers were buying, in most cases it was 12 kV or 35 kV, and distributing it around to the methane gas wells. But those installations were not utility installations. So they're, the question is, do we need to be writing the rules for that? And answer to that, but would seem that if the customer owns it, we got responsibilities for it, whether we want them or not.
Exactly.
We have, we've got some big industry in our area, steel mills and car plants, and primarily steel, I would think, where where people are buying power at 115 kV. I know a gentleman, North Alabama, that his company does commissioning substations and that sort of stuff, and he says that he's got customers that have 230 kV service points at their facilities. So it's out there, but you're right. If you had to inspect a 230 kV system at a facility right now, I don't know what you'd do with the NEC.
And it might be it might be just as simple as saying, you know, you need to go to engineering supervision or something like that. But at least we need to be more clear about what we're covering, be more clear where it's located. And believe it or not, to Al's point, that things are still spread out. There's a lot of people that would like to, you know, put the medium voltage in one chapter, so it's all grouped, and that would be Article 311, 490, and all the other articles we talked about. So it remains to be seen what will happen this cycle and next. But you know, at least like Donnie said before, we've started the discussion, and we hope to keep improving on it and to move the code down the road.
So what do you
Yeah,
think?
and maybe that is,
We need folks that are
and maybe
illiterate
that's,
to help us.
yeah, maybe that's a solution. Make a new chapter, you know, within that voltage range that you think would be suitable for, you know, 90.2's scope, because that's what I'm hinging everything on, the practical safeguarding of personnel and equipment. If you can't achieve that, then you're not really within the scope of the NEC. So there's definitely got to be a delineation between what amount of safety we can provide. We obviously have limitations, so we need to know those limitations and compartmentalize those limitations so we know how to deal with them. If we can't deal with them, then write something up that'll send you to IEEE or engineering supervision or whatever the case may be. The book has its limitations, and voltage is definitely up there.
Awesome.
That's my point.
Cool beans.
And lucky for us, somebody put in a 90.2 installation of voltage up to 35,000 volts. I don't know who that could be, but
Was that L?
there is a PI out there. Yeah. So we'll see if it flies.
So okay, so we have a participant in the code process. Thank you, L,
Oh, yeah.
for that
Oh, yeah.
public input.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you, and Tom, thanks for all you do in this endeavor. It's really appreciative.
Not a problem, brother. We're here
Okay,
for you.
thank you, guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Al.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Well, that was good. So, what do you think about that, Larry? I think that's an interesting point of not over 35,000. So, we're going to see that public input. So, we'll see how that flies. Cool.
There he's off.
Oh, up.
Turn him on, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. You know, I had some background noise, so I had to mute you, buddy.
Man.
Yep.
No, but I think that, you know, his point is well taken that, you know, if we're going to do it, if the NEC is responsible for it, if we are to cover those things from up to 35,000 or higher, we need to do a good job at it. And so we need to either figure out how to make it better and then put things in place and possibly get better expertise to review those things and submit public input so everything's clear. And you know, just as we said that the telecommunication has changed and it's no longer the Ma Bells of the world, it's the same thing that goes with the utility industry. You know, we are having microgrids and different things out there that it's no longer the utility of old, and so we have to adopt and change and improve it.
Yeah, you know, Ryan points out that how about his note was, how about addressing proper use of defined terms like identified does not mean marked, yet about half the times we say identified, we mean marked. And he goes, he can make a PI to address that without submitting 500 PIs because we use that term like so many places. So, he points out a good issue that, or at least a valid concern that, and there's a lot of terms. I mean, he identified. But what about the use of the word panel board? I mean, I don't know how many locations in the code where I see where it says the wires shall be the wires located in the panel board. A panel board doesn't have an enclosure around it. A panel board is the guts only. So it should be enclosed panel board. That would make more sense. So there's things like that on just the use of terms. And I think you brought that up too, Larry, about just proper use of terminology between throughout the NEC is important.
Yeah, and I think too, Ryan had made a point a long time ago about, 702, isn't 702 and 710 the same thing? Isn't optional standby and 710 standalone kind of the same thing? And when he first told me that, I thought that was I've never heard that before. But then when Tommy, you started your renewable energy task group, those people kind of have that thought process in the back of their head, and I think the communication was key, that we were able to flush some of those things out and try to come up with some better terminology and how better scopes of articles to make it clear.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. All right. Vince Delacroce says, as a rookie on the technical committee for NFPA 99, he's looking forward to the home healthcare discussion. Oh, man. That's going to be fun. Cool beans. Well, let's see. I'm looking out what we have. So, L, we already talked to him. I don't see anybody else wanting to jump on the knife and dial in, and it is 7:58. We said we were going 6 to 8, and I know Larry and Donny, you guys obviously, just based on what I'm looking at, need your beauty sleep. So,
Tom, I just want to say that first of all, I didn't think we'd be able to make it to 2 hours, but we did. But the second thing, I want to commend you on all your efforts that you've done for the Western Section meeting, as well as what you're doing for the Eastern Section. I think you do a fantastic job, and you're really a great person for the electrical industry and moving it forward.
I appreciate that. Appreciate that feedback, Larry. Thank you very much. Yep. So we have a good rollout. We had a great. Today was the first time. I know Chad Kennedy's session this morning was. We had a lot of people asking about the Mentimeter thing, but I think we worked through that. Tomorrow should be even better. So. And am I going to see both of you guys at the R&R Ranch tomorrow night? Or I know we got Jeff Sargent on. I don't know, Larry. I think you need to, and it could be. I mean, just think. Talk about the trio, the Larry Ayer and the Jeff Sargents and the Donny Cooks. Man, I think we would implode.
Did you send me a link to that, Thomas?
Tomorrow night? I'll send you. You know what? I'll put both of you on the invite, and then Steve Froming is going to go over some of the history of the R&R. So you got to learn about the history of the R&R too. So
okay.
Yep, should be a good program. And then tomorrow we have a vendor program as well. I'm going to see if I can't get Square D or somebody else to dial back in again because we had a little rough start. The Square D guy today had lost his power at the house, so we're going to see if we can't get him back on YouTube. If not, but we'll have Dan Neeser from Busman on the program tomorrow afternoon. So we'll see how that goes. All right, everybody. It is 8 o'clock. Larry, we made it to 8, and I thought it was a really good session. I learned a little bit, and I enjoyed the dialogue. I mean, you should see. Wait, you guys got to check out this YouTube stream because there is so much dialogue going on in the chat. It is really awesome. And Jeff Grossi is giving us the claps, saying thank you to Donny, Tom, and Larry, and Vince Delacroce says they're great job. So, any final words, Donny?
Can I tell Deanna that we're still trending?
Yes, you can. And you know what, Donny? I should have live streamed this to the the Central Division chapter.
I told her to look at yours, and so she's probably on. Sure,
That's
she
good.
probably was on.
That's good. That's good. And Larry, is Robin at home watching?
I don't think so. I do think that Alabama, that's a new term for Alabama, trending.
That was my daughter, Deanna, and she assured me that Thomas and I were not trending.
Oh man, you know what? I got to talk to her.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to talk. Maybe I'll have to come next time I come down to do a program. Well, a pizza night or a Mexican night. We'll have to have a healthy discussion over dinner.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Take care, Thomas.
Thank
Take
you,
care, Larry.
Donnie. Thanks, Larry. I appreciate
Thank you,
chatting
guys,
with
and
you.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I'm gonna sign off, and I'm gonna shut this feed down. Where's my things? Thanks for everybody out there in YouTube land. I really appreciate you being there and dialoguing. So that really helped everything go well. I will be sending out the links for tomorrow. So we'll have the AM session 10 to 12, the lunch vendor virtual booth from 12:30 to 1:30 Eastern. So 10 to 12 Eastern, first session, and I believe that is going to be motors with and practical application of motors with Dan Neeser, if I'm not mistaken. And then we'll have the vendors, and I believe it's Busman's going to be on a booth. I'm going to reach out to Square D again and see if they can revisit us on tomorrow afternoon as well, because he lost his power and everything. But in any case, and then afternoon session will be Code Panel 2, so you'll want to tune in for that. And then the evening will be R&R Ranch, where we'll have Jeff Sargent, and we'll have Steve Froming. Steve's going to give us a little history of the R&R Ranch. And Jeff, we're going to talk about something, I'm sure. So you're going to want to be there, and we're going to do the dial-in too. So get your questions ready for Jeff Sargent, and please leverage it, and we'll call you and get you engaged. Alrighty, thank you, and stay safe and stay healthy. So I am shutting down the feed. Take care. See you tomorrow.